They say history whispers lessons, but what if we've been missing the loudest voices? The ones buried in silence, hidden in stoicism, locked in spaces between I'm fine and I can't do this anymore. Welcome to the Hearts of Men podcast, where we don't just talk about black men, we listen. I go by the mindset coach, and tonight we're tearing up the script. To close out Black History Month, we're not just looking back, we're decoding the blueprint. Because the stories of black men, grandfathers, fathers, son, aren't just history. They're the missing keys to our collective freedom. We'll crack open phrases like emotional reparations and two-way sankofa. This isn't just a conversation, though. It's a call for fathers to exhale, sons to ask the unasked, and generations to finally see each other. I want you to share this with somebody who shaped your story or the one you're writing it with. Let's bridge the gap and build the future. Welcome to the new legacy. So, gentlemen, I kind of want to start off real quick as we get started here. And I'm going to start off a little different today because I think today is going to be story time, right? So, I kind of want to start off with that. Thank you so much, Lisa Keys. Greatly appreciate you. Um, so, I'm going to start off with kind of like a story trivia. You guys up here cannot answer the trivia. You guys in the chats, by all means, welcome. Dive into the trivia because I think it's going to be rather interesting. Okay. Um, This story is about a father and a son's interaction. The father was a Tuskegee airman who had a great and successful career. He loved flying so much that he chose to add commercial airline pilot to the end of his resume, flying all across the country for a major airline. It was always the father's dream that his son would follow in his footsteps. But unfortunately, the son had a condition that disqualified him from flying. That said, the son forged his own path in law enforcement. The father and son had a routine where they would meet at the airport every time the father had a flight that brought him into Washington Dulles. During their meetings, they would play a game of chess and talk about what is going on in each other's lives. In this particular meeting, they learned a lot about one another. Well, there was one particular meeting that I'm talking in particular where the son shared with the father that he was about to be a grandfather. Another meeting, the father shared with the son that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. But this next meeting was significant. Yes, even more significant than the aforementioned. This meeting, the father noticed the lapel pin that his son was wearing. This pin was different. The father mentioned it to him. The son responded that he was selected to be a part of the presidential security detail. The father looked at his son very proudly. But what the father asked next really gets to the point that I really want to make. He asked his son, "Do you get to ride aboard Air Force One?" He replied with something that his father didn't expect to hear. He said, "Yes." And with a little smile, he asked his father, "Do you want to see her?" Excitedly, his father said, "Yes." The scene changes, and the father and the son were standing in front of Air Force One. The son was confidently sharing with his father the capabilities of this aircraft as the father gazed in amazement. With hints of tears in his eyes, the father said, "Look at you, son. Look at what you've done." The son, smiling, walked closer to his father. "Look at you, Dad. Look at what you've done." A Tuskegee airman, a commercial airline pilot, and the father of the son who now protects the president. So that's the story I kind of want to start this conversation off with. And again, if you know the story, by all means, put where I got it from because I am interested to see if anybody knows. I know these fine gentlemen up here probably already, especially this one that's got the little smirk on his face down here. I know he know where I got it from. Um, and I think that's kind of like sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today, because I want to kind of there you go, his divine appointment. I want to kind of put it out there because in listening to that story, I think it's important for us to dissect this one question. I want you gentlemen to just imagine being the father or the son, your choice, in this scenario. What are the thoughts going through your head and the feelings that you are experiencing this particular point in time?
I I'm a father of three. 19, 23, 29, all military, all in the military, all in the army. Um I grew up and when I was in the military and started having kids at some point, I wanted all of my sons to join the military. Excuse me. I wanted all of them to do at least 3 years where I got what I wanted. You know, we want certain things. Um, and I think that when we get it, we're excited. But also I think there's a point in there, at least for me, that I hope that what I didn't do was manipulate the situation to whereas I kind of pushed them in a certain direction. I hope that at the end of the day that their decision to go in was their decision. Um as a son, I mean, as a father, I mean, as looking at this scenario, I think it's cool. You know what I mean? I think that, at the end of the day, the son was able to give the father a different perspective. And I think, that's a really good feeling, that I felt with my sons is when they have shared certain things with me to give me a different perspective. So I liked everything about it. I think there was a lot of different little nuggets in there that can be pulled out from that scenario. And I think that probably all of us can attach some sort of parent, father, parent, daughter, parent child relationship scenario or memory from this.
I love this whole scene and the setup and the scenario and everything. And I love how when the son brought him, and after the father said, "Look at what you've done," the son replied, "Look at what we've done." And it's like, because he understood that it was your pouring into me, allowing me to be myself, allowing me to take my own path because I couldn't go yours, even though you wanted to steer me in that direction. But you continue to celebrate me, you continue to support me. And you can see in their dialogue while they're playing chess, while they're just sitting there, just communicating back and forth about everything and about nothing. And I've been on both sides of that with my children, where I've seen them, uh, whether it be get a master's degree or get or pass your licensing for your paramedic license and everything like that, where I can say, man, I didn't put in the work, but I started some work that allowed them to continue and put in some work. And so it's not my work that I'm uh, looking at in totality, but I'm looking at my work and I'm looking at these people that I helped raise, that now they aspire to do things that I can be proud of. And as a son, when I would go home, being in the military, getting out of situations and so forth and so on, and being a father and a grandfather that's actively in my children's lives, and my parents or my father, whomever it is, they commend me on that. And it's like, man, it tugs at the heartstrings, because it's not like I'm doing it for that, but I'm glad that it's noticed.
Yeah, this particular scene, if you guys hadn't figured it out, his divine, um, his divine appointment put it in the chat. That is the scene from the TV series Paradise, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'm telling you, you're missing something. It's a pretty awesome TV show. Um, but just that scene alone, like when I first seen that scene, it kind of hit me. I mean, I just kind of got stuck in that moment because in that moment, like you just heard, sure, the father wanted the son to follow in his footsteps, but he couldn't. But then just being able to give the dad that particular moment, knowing that he loved flying. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of it, but knowing that he loved flying, he gave him that particular moment to see the premiere of our aircrafts, the same types of aircrafts that he flies now. Being able to understand what that feels like. I don't think the son could relate to that, but I think when he turned around and looked at the look on his dad's face, I think that spoke volumes to him. Um, and it reminds me a lot when my stepdaughter she joined the Air Force. And again, it was largely based upon me understanding some things based upon what she wanted, and then having to select a plan B. because she didn't necessarily set herself up for success. But when she joined the Air Force, she went off the basic training, and she wrote me a letter like halfway through it, and that letter broke me down because she told me that was the moment, being in basic training, she understood why I was the way that I was in all of the years of her upbringing, why I wouldn't accept excuses, why I was very determined when it came down to taking responsibility for your actions. If you give your word, make sure that you follow up on the word that you give and all that great stuff. And she was hurt. She actually hurt her ankle during the Air Force basic training, but she had a couple more weeks to go and she fought through it, which is clearly not like the person I raised in my house. So it was like one of those things that really it kind of hit me. And then just being able to go to her graduation and be there and watch them walk around in uniform, and then afterwards spend time with her and things of that nature, and taking pictures with her. It was just, that. Was I disappointed that she didn't go in the army? Heck no. My baby wasn't cut out for the army. Trust me. You know your child, man. You know your child, right? She would not have liked the army. She would have been out, but she is still in the Air Force, still doing her thing to this day. And so I think when we look at stuff like that, I think it goes a long way. Now, I don't want to abandon this just yet because I kind of want to go back to some of the things you said. Unc, you said your boys joined the army. So you kind of had that legacy of career that you get to see them, experience here and now. Like, I know it might be take your time. Um, what does that mean to you as a dad?
Um, I don't know. Like I've heard people say that you really don't know how you've done as a parent until your kids grow up and they start having kids. If whatever you instilled in your children, they pass those things down to their children, and you can see it based off of how your grandkids are. Now, that's just one, there's just some people's theory. Of course, there's other different perspectives and theories and stuff like that. But for argument's sake, let's say that I agree with that. Well, so far I'm doing okay. I look to my left and my right, and I've been in the situations where I didn't know what they were going to do. I didn't know if what I was doing as a father was the right thing to do. Do I tell them to do this? Should I force them to do this? Or should I allow them to make their own mind up and choices when it come to certain things, even growing up, because how you treat them as they grow up, middle school, high school, and stuff like that affects how they operate and how they make decisions as they become, young men and young adults and different things like that. So to see them actually, decide to stop doing some of the things that they were doing, to cut their dreads off, to stop sitting around the house and playing the game all the time, to sitting in the living room talking to a recruiter, to one of my sons that's been deployed, um, and now coming back, here in a couple of weeks, it makes me proud, but it also goes back to that thing that that means that my father had to have done something right as well. Now, this is not to discredit anything that my mother done, but right now, since we're specifically talking about black men, that means that my father had to instill certain things in me in order for me to pass along to my son, in order for him to pass along to his daughters. And happy birthday, Tessa. Her birthday was yesterday. She just turned 8 years old. We spent about 30 minutes on Facebook Messenger, and I felt like it was my birthday. I had a really good time. So it just makes me really proud that my sons are out there, that they're serving their country. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few years when it comes to whether or not they're going to stay in or get out. We don't know. Some of us, like me and Coach, we both got out and then went back in. So I don't know what the future is going to hold for them, but at least I know right now that they're at least headed in a direction and they're on their path. So that's the main thing. And what I'm most proud about is that they're out there and they're starting their own journey in their own life, and they're not necessarily depending on anybody else um as of right now. So
Man, I love that, and thank you for sharing that with us. And happy birthday, Tessa.
yeah.
To everybody from everybody. Happy birthday from the entire channel. Um, Poor man's Dr. Phil. Your turn. Your kids didn't necessarily follow in your footsteps. Am I correct by saying that?
Correct. One went to the Air Force, but it wasn't for him. But I think me going into the Air Force was out of necessity. They didn't grow up with that same necessity and same desire to, oh, I got to get away from here. So when he went into the Air Force, I told him before, I'm like you. I'm thinking, okay, this ain't the same kid that was raised in the house. Boy, you're lazy. You ain't going to want. So I'm like, okay. And you try to tell him, but you also going to tell him, hey, you figure it out when you get there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for him. But when I can sit down and have adult conversations with my children, you still my child, and I will always look at you as my child. But when you can look at them like, okay, you standing on your own 2 feet, you making positive decisions. You may do some stuff, and everybody does over here and over there. But what it boils down to is, are you doing things that you can hold your head up from? So are you making mistakes and saying, okay, I'm going to be better off after this? Or are you continuing down the path to where I'm like, dog, I can't even help you? See, I think I look at it like everyone, all these kids, they make their own decisions. But when you can look at them and have that conversation, and then you hear something that you said, like, man, I ain't said that in some years. And he bringing it back to me. You want to get excited. Me,
Right.
I want to get excited, but I just, okay. So I'm just saying he's listening. He may not do it right then, but he's listening. So he or she, they know better. They know what's right. They're respectful. They're respectable, and they are striving to do something and not just do nothing. Because sometimes I see it like, dog, you just doing this, you doing, and then I got to pull back. Like, hey, it's not my walk. I can't push them in the direction that I want them to go. And it's a source of pride when I see them accomplish things, when I see them raising kids, when I see them and I hear my voice come out of their mouth when it comes to discipline and when it comes to certain things, because other things I didn't do too well.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear that. Then I was wrong when I did it. That's why I had to apologize. But yeah, I think it's a source of pride when you hear your words coming out of their mouth or your behaviors coming from them.
See, and that's where I'm at. I never wanted my kids to follow in my footsteps. I never wanted them to join the army, if I'm being transparent. And I told them that when they were kids. I'm like, I did the hard thing so that you don't have to do the hard thing. I want you to start further along in this race than where I had to start at. And I'm with you when it comes down to those conversations. Like I look forward today to having those conversations, with my adult kids and listening to their feedback and how they're attacking the world and, what the world is doing to them. And, they up against the rope, bobbing and weaving every now and then. And then every now and then they got the world in the middle of the ring and they're throwing jabs, body blows and uppercuts and things of that nature. I like hearing those stories. I like hearing how they're maneuvering through this world and finding their own path. And then one of the things I always leave them with is that, look, I'm always here. If you need somebody to talk to, if you just need to vent, that's what I'm here for. If you're looking for some sound advice, that's what I'm here for. And I think that's really the direction of the conversation that we're headed to today, because again, I think at some place we may have collectively missed the mark, because there's a lot of conversation that should have been had, a lot of conversation that's out there that could have been had. And I think going back to the scenario, listening to how you gentlemen just kind of like articulate, what I tend to call senior fatherhood. I don't want to say grandparenthood. Yeah, senior fatherhood looks like, right? Um, I think we need to understand that there's a curriculum that's interlaced in between the stories of generations, and somehow that curriculum gets lost either by the older generation not necessarily telling the story or the younger generation not necessarily listening to the stories that can be told. And the beauty of the stories, it kind of when, like you heard previously, it kind of ties into the differences in the generations, just like in a previous story between the father and the son. So imagine like the story shared between like those two that we just talked about. Imagine the story shared between Garfield and his three sons, and Roland and his children, and me and my children, right? Imagine the lessons that can be learned on both behalves. And that's kind of like one of the places that I want to go. So the question I want to ask you, gentlemen, like if you can think about it, and I know it's kind of like imagineering, so just kind of work with me here. What pain do you think like your father or your grandfather never named for one reason or the other? And how could naming it, together rewrite your family story? Again, I'm gonna ask it again just to give you guys the opportunity to think, imagining what pain do you think your father or your grandfather or both, it could be either or, never named in the conversations with you, and how could naming it together rewrite your family story?
I think my father's pain coming from he was in the military and going to Vietnam, and he never talked about the things that he saw and did over in Vietnam. But my grandmother would say Vietnam caused him to have this substance abuse problem because going over there, but he never spoke of it. And I think if it were to have came from him, it would have had a different impact on my life of how I maneuvered when it came to drugs and things of that nature. Because if it were to came from him, then I see the damage, but I don't see. I can see the damage that it's doing, but I don't hear the pain coming from him. And I think if I were to had heard the pain coming from him, I would have had a better understanding of what he had gone through and how it affected him. And then my upbringing and looking at drugs as being a source of income. I don't think I would have went that route. I think I would have shunned every uh, anything when it came to anything like that. I would have shunned it and took a different path. And that's for me. That's one of those things where that whole Vietnam and the drugs and everything that you know affected me.
Um, pain, right? Jeez. Um, I guess I want a clarifying question, Coach. What do you mean by pain?
Yes. I mean, so just imagine, like, kind of like put yourself in their shoes, or like
Mm-hmm.
your father or your grandfather, and what are some of the struggles, known or unknown, that they may have dealt with that you wish they like articulated to you openly so that you can better understand some of the things that they were doing, or why did they do the things they do, or things of that nature?
Yeah. Um. All right. Hold on. Mm.
I don't know what's happening right now. um, okay. Um, so in the meantime, I guess I'll go. Um, like you, um, Roland, my dad never been in Vietnam or anything of that nature. Um, I got you. Um, but some of the struggles that I know my dad may have dealt with, may have, right? And I'm not claiming to know the details behind it. I'm not claiming to know the entire story, but just imagining, um, you know, having a family at a very young age and trying to manipulate this thing they call manhood in a time frame where it was very difficult, providing for a family in a very different military, a military that looks greatly different than what we experienced. Getting to the point of not necessarily understanding emotional intelligence, dealing with some of the things that he experienced from his dad, and not necessarily coming to the point to where he can harmonize with the reality of the truth and all of those things. And now you have a child that you got to raise, and I'll say this openly. Most people don't know that I had an older sister, but she experienced what they call crib death. So she literally died before I was born. And him harvesting all of that as a father, as a man, and not necessarily having the outlet, at least so he didn't think he had an outlet to express it openly and honestly so that people can actually understand. But he still has to take care of his family. He still has to go to work every day and behave like everything is fine and all kind of stuff like that. And I can only imagine how difficult that can be. And then fast forward, now you have the son that comes along, and now you can imagine what type of fear that he may have been experiencing. On top of that, knowing you just recently lost a child not even a year ago, a full year ago. So I think all of those things compiled together, if being able to talk, and I want to kind of go back to what Roland says, not just the information, but the honesty within the context of the information about how it affected him. I think that kind of, I think that would have meant a world of different, probably a world of difference between the outcome of him and my mother. I don't know, but definitely an outcome holistically when it comes down to all of us, not just me, but my other sister as well. So I think all of those things, piling together, the loss of my sister Erica, the situation with he and his dad, who if I ever met, I was too young to even remember. So all of those things, if he could have had that conversation with me very early to the point that I understood what was going on and understanding more about his story, then it could have helped me, shape my story. Not that I'm disappointed in how my story turned out, but it's all about the shaping in the beginning and having a good understanding of how that unfolds as a young man. Brother Gaddy, good to see you. Welcome. I know you just got here. And whenever you're ready to jump in, no rush. But yeah.
Man, good evening, brothers. Chat man, my apologies. Had to get the kids right. Daddy duty tonight. But I've been listening, and especially on this question, with what you just said, actually made me change kind of the way I was thinking when I first listened to this question. But because I started thinking about my father went through two divorces, right? Um, and then kind of like what you, but my older sister passed away when I was 16. She was 4 days after her 20th birthday. Um, and I know my father, Vietnam, all that other good stuff, but all we ever saw from my father was strength, was that stoicness that we talk about, you know, he said things that you knew that he hurt when my sister passed, but we never talked about it. We never talked about none of these things. Like, so it's kind of like that scenario where it's like, well, how am I supposed to handle it? I look at him, and so all we saw was, well, you know what? All we got is strength. All we got is strength. Gaddy man, we strong. We got to be strong. We got to, you know. And so when my father passed away, we didn't understand because it was I'm ready to go. Stop saving my life kind of conversation, and we're like, nah, Negro, you told us to be strong in everything, So we sitting up here trying to figure out how you ready to go, and all you taught us to do was fight. And so understanding his emotional journey to how he thought versus just the end goal of be strong. I think if I understood how his mind maneuvered would have gave us a little bit more emotional intelligence in our generation. Because I tell you what, me and my brothers, I think all of us, we're pretty good. We can cut something off real quick. You walk out, I could be on to the next tomorrow. Like, it's sad to say it like that, like, but that's the way that we have built ourselves, learning how to exemplify this strength that he told us all to be. I hope that makes sense.
Welcome, Gaddy. Good to see you, brother. All right, so here's my I'm going to use myself as the father, and I'm going to use my father as the grandfather in this situation. My father lost his father when he was around 14 years old. So because he lost his father so young, there were certain things that did not get inputted into him during those pivotal years of being a teenage boy. You know what I'm saying? And then have to deal with that and carry that, for the rest of your life, right? So during that time, my father took to substance. My father was substance abuse, and he ended up being a teenage father, you know. And then I say all of that and move forward to me because of some of those decisions and choices that he made, probably because of some of the pain that he had dealt with, by losing his father at such an early age. Of when I was in ninth grade and 14, is when our lives changed a little bit too. And he wasn't there for a certain amount of time. So he wasn't around for me during those pivotal years of life either. You know what I'm saying? So there were certain things that wasn't inputted into me as well. However, I think I had such a great foundation and base that I was able to still not mess it up too much going forward. And then now when I look at my oldest son who is um moved on and doing good things and stuff like that, but I still think that I had to go through a lot of stuff in order to get to where I'm at. And I think all of that is all some of that, and then some of the what some would call, I know we had some other shows about that generational curse. I'm only using that just because a lot of people are familiar with that term, but that's something else. But so I think some of that pain kept rolling down and rolling down, and it wasn't until recently where um maybe mid to late 30s, I was like, something has to change. So I think when I'm comparing, I'm comparing that to the rewriting that family story as that, we're not going to do that no more. We're going to change the path going forward. We're not going to be on substance abuse. We're going to be there for our kids during those pivotal years, especially 14 through 18 and on and on. You know what I'm saying? So I think maybe if my dad had someone to help him navigate some of that pain, maybe he wouldn't have went through some of the different things that he went through, and to cause some of the pain that is still evident in the family from some of the decisions that he made.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand that when it comes down to our family stories, the story is an entirety of it. I know a lot of times we want to construct the story to where it's all goodness. But if we're being completely honest, no family has a totally good story. Like the bad parts of the story are still part of the story. And what you have to understand is that the younger generation needs that. They need the bad part of the story, because if you paint the picture, and I'll just talk about me, if you paint the picture that you were this perfect model person the entirety of your life, now in their mind they have something that is extremely difficult to follow behind. Like they believe that you're going to expect perfection out of them every step of the way. So it's like you never did anything wrong. And so I think when we do not have these stories, when we do not have these conversations, honestly, and sharing from a place of transparency to kind of help them to understand, like, look, I did a lot of things wrong. Me personally, this is the story I have on my kids. I did some things wrong. But what I don't want you to do is go out there and repeat the same things that I did. I want you to learn from the lessons that I learned from the things that I did wrong. So allow me to tell you the things that I did and the things that I learned from them so that you don't go out there and repeat them. Because if you repeat them, I'm telling you, it's going to be a steep hill to climb. I think that's important because a lot of times, as the younger generation, we kind of have this mindset that if, and I'm just going to use this as an example, I'm not saying that this is the example that I want you guys to focus on, but if something happened and mom and dad is no longer together, then dad is the bad guy. And we treat dad like an outcast. So I guess the next question is how can they share, like, I don't know, trauma or a situation or their version of the story, or just talk in general without guilt, and the youth receive it without judgment.
I think the elders got to know who their audience is. Um, I think it's okay to share, but I don't think you share any and everything with everybody of the younger generation. You know, there are some things, you know, people talking about, oh well, you know, don't share this. Oh, go ahead.
And I got a question. You say know who your audience is. Could you be a little bit more definitive with that?
Yes, your audience is the audience that is receptive and is probably looking to receive something in a positive sense from whatever it is that you're sharing. You know what I mean? Not someone who is going to judge. You got that auntie who just want to know some information just so she can share it and pass the information on. That's not who we want to share certain things with. You know, say for instance, you got a young man, you know, he's early 20s or something like that. He's on his grind, he's trying to come up, and you know, he may see you as Unc, and he say, "Hey, Unc, you know, I know that you know you was married for a long time. What were some of the things that you know you did in your relationship to cause it to fail? You know what I mean? So I can make sure that I don't do it, you know, in my marriage or in my relationships, you know, and sometimes, you know, you may be inclined to share some information, you know, and I think in those situations, those are the different types of audience that I'm talking about. You know, the young man or the young person who may be on that grind and trying to learn from you versus the person who just want information, who's just going to judge and pass it around. And that don't necessarily have to be your family. That can be, you know, if we're speaking about, it don't necessarily have to be your family. It could be, you know, I work in a high school. I'm working around, you know, 13, 14 to 18, 19-year olds every single day. You know what I mean? They're going through a lot of all kind of stuff like this. I have to be careful to not share every single thing with them. You know, and certain things I do share, I have to make sure that it's within certain boundaries, yada, yada, yada. But I think that elders should be able to share. I think it's okay to share, but at the end of the day, they have to know who their audience is.
I think that for me, when it comes to sharing, I think I never want to put, if it's two parties involved, I never want to just put the other person out there without their knowledge or just throw them under the bus without their knowledge. Now, if it's something so detrimental and so heinous that it has to be identified, it is what it is. I got to call a spade a spade. But if it's something where, like, okay, me and your mother, we fell out and we got a divorce or something like that, I'm never going to be the person to badmouth or bash her. I'm not going to be the person to say, well, she did this, so I did this. No, I will name and identify everything that I did in my roles within the confines of the marriage and the disillusion of it. I will talk about that, but I won't bash, because I think that at some point, I never want my kids to look at the other parent in a disrespectful manner. Now, if they do that on their own, that's fine. If they see what is, and they say, oh, that was messed up. But I also want them to be able to have some type of grace and say, okay, we were in a different place. Or your dad was dealing with some demons and this, and then I name what it was. I'm not just going to throw it out there and say, well, I was just messed up. I got to say, call a spade and say, hey, I was out there doing this, and that. And that led to everything in the dissolution, dissolvement of it. So I think the elders need to speak directly about it. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't talk around it, or don't avoid it. Because sometimes, like when I was growing up, they let sleeping dogs lie. We don't need to talk about that. And I think that just adds to more questions, more curiosity. Like, yeah, dog, what happened? Like, all my other aunties dark, and this one auntie light skinned. She don't look like none of the sisters. And so, you start asking questions, and then you get a bad taste in your mouth because somebody didn't speak up and tell the truth up front. They didn't say what was what. And when you do that, I think it makes it to where, okay, if they didn't do it now, when my kids come ask me questions, I don't want to, hey, no, I don't want to, no, I don't want to live up to that. I don't want you throwing that in my face because I didn't do what I needed to do to get over that. And now it's a trauma that I'm holding on to, but I'm saying I let it go. And all I did was put it in the closet and allow other people not to see it.
At some point I want to know how we figure out what we are and what we are not supposed to share too. Not right now, just
I didn't know somebody was going to respond to that. I was waiting.
Oh no, not yet.
Okay. I look at this question, similar viewpoint on the outcome road, but overall, I look at it as the elders are the culture setters for the family, right? If we have to somehow, some way, as the elder, you have to create the culture of sharing, of transparency, right? I get on. There's some things that may not need to be shared, right? But I'm big on how do we set that culture for them to receive it. Some of our younger generations don't like to receive certain things or hear certain things because the culture has already been set, right? And then on the other end, there was something that was mentioned earlier, and it made me think about how often we look at people that are younger than us and say, well, when I did it. I think Coach brought up being in the military. The before, it's not that the Army don't look the same as when we were or were on active duty, but when all the young soldiers here is, well, when I was a soldier, we used to. When I was a soldier, we used to. It sounds combative, like now we're against each other. And I think if we can kind of minimize, because I understand the comparison, because I do it sometimes when I hear soldiers say things. When I see these soldiers walk in with these beards down to here, I'm like, man, you can walk out of your footprint. You can walk out of your car with one little piece of peach fuzz hanging out, But the culture has changed, and instead of us bashing or creating a us versus them, if we created a culture to where it was, hey, this is why we did this thing, or this is how we look at it. I think now the younger people, they look at the elders as the teachers, not as the opposition. And I think that's why when we see, like, without the judgment, I think young people judge because they feel in opposition. I have to be better than the older group, right? Like me and Roland, we mess around sometimes talking about the LeBron Jordan thing, but half of that sometimes is like his opposition. Is like, LeBron has to be better than Jordan or we're not progressing. Or Jordan has to be better than LeBron because we did it better in the 90s and the 80s, right? Versus you get what I'm saying? Like, so that I think that is what causes that disdain from hearing. So when you start sharing trauma and you start sharing how things unfolded and how we got to where we are as the young people don't want to hear. They're like, well, we're writing our own story. No, the story is just continuing. Yeah. I hope I answered the question properly.
You did as well. I wouldn't say it's not about proper. It's just trying to get the word out that we're not in competition, and I think that's the key. And the key is that a lot of the elders, when it comes down to that guilt that they're carrying around, that guilt exists because you were worried about how they're going to look at you when you share that story. But at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to go back and rewrite that story. Again, I want to go back to, I think it was Unc, you said it. Like every story isn't designed to be told, right? I don't necessarily need to articulate to you the ins and outs of me and your mother's relationship. That's a relationship. I'm not going to ask you the ins and outs of the current relationship you got. If you say that's the one, okay, fine. If it turns out that that's not the one, okay, fine. You still my child. I appreciate the relationship that you've been in because at the end of the day, you learned something, hopefully, from that relationship. So I do agree with the fact that understand the stories to share, but I also want people to understand as elders, the only reason we feel guilt about sharing that story is because we are worried about them and how they're looking at us when we share that story. If I share my story, what version of my title for you changes? Do I no longer be your dad if I do share the story? I don't think that changes, right? On the other hand, when it comes down to the youth receiving without judgment, just live a little longer. I promise you, you're going to realize that whatever it is that they did, regardless of whatever it is, it was either done for a reason or it was done because they didn't know anything else to do. And so when you're doing your thing, when you're working out your magic, keep in mind, you got this thing called YouTube. A lot of these gentlemen up here, didn't have YouTube when we was, in our teenage years. A lot of our parents, there was not even a talk of a YouTube or internet or any of that thing. You got to realize we're the internet generation. It started with us. So we got the first experience in our generation and our parents. We were learning the internet at the exact same time. So the younger generation has the privilege of having the internet the entirety of their life. So this is the norm. Take it away from them and watch what actually happened. It's almost like watching somebody fall on the floor and start shaking because they got the hives. So you have a repository of information that we didn't have until a certain point in time. And then we became a part of the repository that built that information for you to have. Now you kind of put into it as well, but the older generation, they did not. So they're learning. And I think that's kind of like the space of all of this conversation. Too much competition, too much judgment that's happening between the older generation and the younger generation, and it needs to stop because we're all a part of the same story. And until we recognize that, we're going to keep creating that divide, the proverbial divide that exists simply because we don't necessarily understand the two-way Sankofa. Now, if you look this up, Sankofa just simply means reaching back to bring forward, right? So what does that really mean? That means that in my lifespan, whatever my parents did not share with me, I have a responsibility to go to them and try to extract that out of them so I can bring it forward. Not necessarily the technique that they use, and in some cases it is the technique, but the lessons that they learn from it. But then vice versa, they can actually learn from us and we can learn from the younger generation as well. So it's learning that's happening in between both generations. And Garfield, I really want to get to your question and understanding how here in a second. But it's lessons that can be learned from both. It's lessons that can be learned from the older generation, and it's lessons that can be learned from the younger generation. Now, I don't want to talk about the skills because I was going to do it, but time is not on our side for that. But the question is it possible for us to honor tradition without being trapped by it? And if so, how?
I think you have to learn from every tradition. Like some traditions, I don't adhere to simply because I don't know, when you start to learn things and grow, some traditions you grow out of. So when it comes to eating habits, I used to love eating and all that stuff come out and I'm overeating and everything. But then I learned that it's not necessarily good for me health wise. So I don't partake in it. But I can still partake in some festivities. I can still be around and I can enjoy myself. I think when you can enjoy yourself, being yourself, not having to become somebody else to fit a narrative for someone else, then you can be in any environment and still flourish. I think that, so when it comes to traditions, just because you hold a tradition, sometimes you got to learn where these traditions come from and why you're doing it instead of just going along with the flow because it's just it's it's an overwhelming thing that you get caught up in because we've always done it like this.
So for me, I had to look up the word honor, right? I want to make sure that I was within my parameters and make sure I got this question right. So the honor says to, it just is one of the definitions, and it says high respect or great esteem. So something that I look at as high respect and great esteem is my anniversary, my wedding anniversary. However, comma, we are not trapped by it. I think it's a great thing. We may go out and we may do something, but we are not tied down to the fact that we have to go out and do this great extravagant thing every single year. um so that's kind of where I want to go with it, you know what I mean? It's something simple. It's something that is a tradition that most people who are married celebrate. Is something that they honor, something that they hold in great regard, or um high respect, so for me it's that one. But like I said, me and Shell don't get trapped by what a traditional wedding anniversary is.
I like this. My bad. And I was reading this actually right when you pull right before you pulled it up. It should be retained and shed the ones that do not. Additionally, you can start new traditions, right? But I'm with Roland. I think the way that this works is I get an understanding not just of what we do for the tradition, but why. What's the purpose of the thing, and what is it supposed to show? Now, how do I honor it without being trapped by it? Is because once I understand the purpose behind it, that the way we did it 20 years ago may not serve the same purpose it was intended to serve 20 years ago because the environment has changed. Right now, we're talking about uh the Google generation, right? They can Google anything. They AI generation coming right behind them, right? They can AI almost anything, and so the way we did it back then, does it still serve that same purpose now with the environment changing? And if not, and we change things, or like the word we like to use, we evolve to get to continue to the intent in which, you know, Papa or Grandma or Big Mama set out for us. If I can, well, what does that look like now? Because it don't look like what it used to look like back then. We have a different world, a different environment. So that's when I look at it like, get the understand what the purpose behind it was, and how do we serve that same purpose going forward? That keeps us from being trapped by the tradition. Not necessarily, now the principle is different, but the traditions we're not trapped by, but we're evolving with it.
But y'all is okay. Um, I ain't talking about Christmas and Thanksgiving. I'm sorry. I'm talking about family traditions. What goes on in this house stays in this house, right? Things of that nature, things that you've witnessed growing up, things that you've embodied because it was kind of like a family staple. I will also say, going to see Big Mama, going to see Papa on the weekends or whatever the case may be, like stuff like that. But I don't really care about the holidays thing. That's beneath this. I think that's below the line of this conversation. I am talking about the family. I am talking about, the things that has been, the things that could have been brought forward that did the family good, like Sunday dinners at Big Mama house, kind of like soul food. I think that's a family tradition that was a good family tradition. What goes on in this house stays in this house was not, because again, in that particular mindset, I think what that does is it forces people not to seek help, not to seek, therapy and things of that nature. So when we talking about traditions, I believe it is possible to honor some traditions that are healthy for the family. And again, I'm not saying that you got to go to Big Mama house and have the big old plate of food with food spilling off the side of the house. Go there for the fellowship of the family. Eat some of the food. Eat what you eat, right? But then again, by that same token, fellowship with family. That's the key. I think that's the key for me. But those things that did not serve well, and I'm gonna say this tiptoeing around it slightly, leaving little girls around Uncle Leroy, stuff like that. That's not a good tradition to hold to bring forward. So being transparent about those things, being being consciously aware of the things that we did in yesteryear, the things that we can bring forward and should bring forward, and the things that we need to shed. Going back to what Nick D said, because I think that was perfectly said. I think those are the things that we should be looking at, because I think those are some of the things that do not that like going back to the whole family dinner thing. The Sunday family dinner thing, I think, is probably one of the things that was huge. And I can't speak for everybody's family, but I know that's one thing we did every Sunday, and it was cool because you got to be around your cousins, you got to be around your aunties and your uncles, and you got to see one of the uncles cut up every Sunday, and you look forward to uncle cutting up. You knew it was going to happen, right? So it became kind of like an entertainment thing. And then somebody would make uncle calm down a little bit, and then eventually you go home, and now you got to go to school, but you look forward to Sunday coming back around again. I think those things are good because it allowed the family to communicate within that space. And then, of course, now that leads to family reunions, right? So family reunions are good because now you're intermingling with the distant cousins, the ones that live in different states. I just don't think we do that enough justice today. Just my thoughts. Anybody else got any
With
feedback?
No, I'm with you there, and I was going to bring up the family reunions because every time I go to a funeral, which I've been going to a lot lately, everybody say we got to get together more than just that funeral, but nobody ever plans it. And then if they plan it, everybody got excuses. I think that being in the military and me moving to Texas, moving away from family, made it harder for me just to be okay. We gonna get together, but something can be planned because if you see me on the ship or you see me on some sand, I could have planned to meet up somewhere where we can have a family reunion where we can get together and show respect to the elders, show and talk about how grandma used to do this and grandpa did this and we went hunting and they hear those stories and then like I learned after my grandfather was already had already passed away that my grandfather was a professor at Morehouse. And, if I would have had that growing up while I was in school, it would have gave me a little bit of something in my chest to say, man, we come from a line of people, of thinkers. So I can't be in here acting stupid. That's how I looked at it after the fact. And learning the heritage and commitment to family that they had back then, and now you see your family now, nobody want, oh, we ain't talking to such and such. What? That's your sister. Yeah, I got sisters that don't talk to each other. It's like, wait a minute, that's blood. That's the only one you got. But
Right.
such and such can say something, and y'all cool next week. See, I'm a big proponent of family. Hey, get it right. Get it right. You like, and nobody wants to say I did this wrong, and nobody wants to own their part. But you're quick to point out everybody else's flaws. I think we need to get out of that and get to a point to where we can be more of service to the family and stop looking for the family to serve us.
I like that. Uncle, you about to say something?
I just, I just have different perceptions and views on and definition of what family is. That's all.
Okay. You go stare it.
No, I mean I understand Roland's perspective. You know what I mean, and I understand those blood relatives. And I'm not trying to not trying to pee in a pool or anything like that. But those the people I don't necessarily consider my family anymore. I consider the people that rock with me as my family. I consider the other people as my relatives, and I treat relatives differently than I treat family. I understand. I get the whole thing about the family reunion, and I think it's so important. I had my first one last year. Me, my one of my sisters, and my cousin. We planned it. We got everybody together, as many people as we could. My mom came. Almost everybody came. And then a couple days later, within that week, we lost two family members. We lost the eldest woman, the eldest member of our family, like 2 or 3 days later, right after the family member. And then a couple of days later, we lost one of the youngest females we had. She was 23 years old. So family is very important. You know what I mean? Relatives are so important, and everybody is very important to everybody get together, because even if you're relatives and you're not family with everybody that's there, somebody there is feeling like somebody else there is their family, even though you may just feel like they're your relatives, because there's
Yeah.
so many different connecting points in there. And I don't even know why I said all of that, but hope I ain't
I'm
get
glad.
too far off topic.
Nope, I'm
We
glad you
speak
did.
the same.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm glad you did, because that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Even in those get-togethers, we can iron out our differences. We
Yep.
have the opportunity and space and time to actually iron out our differences. Like
Mhm.
I will never forget, like when my grandmother passed away. Like it was, people could see, like me and my sister was like, you know what I'm saying? Like we was like, hey, hey, that was it. And my auntie pulled me aside. She said, I need you to fix this. I looked at him. I said, because you asked me to, I will put forth the effort as far as I can go. And I was just being just honest with her. I will put forth the effort, but I'm not gonna bend over backwards. She said, but she told me, she said, you're the oldest. I need you to fix this. And I appreciate her candidness. But then by that same token, there's some other things that she didn't know. And that's fine. It is what it is. But I think when you have that opportunity, because you got to realize we didn't come together as an entire family. We may have done that every now and then, but on the other side, I was with them every summer. So my aunts and my uncles on my dad's side, they're like my sisters and my brothers. So like my dad's baby brother is like 7 years older than me, maybe a little, maybe eight. That's he's my uncle. I call him uncle, but that's like my brother. But he was one of the ones that when I was growing up kept me out of trouble, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what family actually does, right? But then if there's anybody I want to know, well, that's either they're a part of the family or not, I go right to him because I don't know what it is about. I guess he studied the family history or whatever, but he'd tell you like, oh yeah, that person there is related to this person who's connected, and they married this person. But boy, that's your cousin. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. So it's like, now you can't date that one when you was growing up. Now you can't date that one. That's your cousin right there. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that. That's who my uncle is. And so you appreciate people like that in the family. What happens when people like that go away? You have no idea who the distant cousins are, how they related, things of that nature. And that's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you. There are people, and I just gave an example to where y'all just don't vibe. It is what it is. But I think part of the reason why you just don't vibe is because we don't spend enough time together. And I think that's part of it. It's not that, and I'll say it like this and we'll move on. I don't believe that we don't vibe 100% because we don't spend enough time together, because we have different views and things of that nature. I think it's because we don't necessarily understand, like, our relatives. We don't understand like the grandparents and things of that nature. And because we did not collectively have an understanding, then somebody kind of strays off or whatever. And it's just my thoughts. I could be totally wrong as it pertains to that. But it is what it is. Okay. I didn't even realize we had an hour and 10 minutes. Um, Listen, if you have not hit that like button yet, please hit that like button. If you have not shared this conversation, please share it. I know you guys are putting stuff in the chat. I'm trying to pull it up and stay tuned with the conversation at the exact same time. But as you guys can see, this is actually a pretty good conversation. Emotional reparations, owning the legacy we inherit and we leave. I think this is important because accountability isn't shame, it's the soil where trust must grow. A grandfather admits to pushing his son to hide vulnerability, then mentors his grandson in healthy emotional expressions is a great example for that. So, gentlemen, the question I want to ask here, which I think is going to be a good one: what cycles of behaviors have we unknowingly repeated, and where do we need to say I'm sorry for our actions?
It's a tough one because nobody really want to say I'm sorry. Let's just start right there. You know, I think the one of the hardest things about accountability is making things right, being apologetic, right? And I don't even like to use the word sorry. I use the word apologetic because that's when you actually have that level of repentance for what you've done to whomever you need to repent to. Whew, but as far as cycles of behaviors, all four of us are dudes up here, so I don't even think we got to spell too much of it out. But a lot of us repeated some cycles of behaviors. We we was in them running them streets. We always like to talk about women being in the street, but some of us was in them streets. You know, uh, messing around, doing whatever we were doing because that's what we saw. We got that good uncle brigade that coach talks about, but we also got that uncle brigade that shows us how to do all the wrong stuff with the right people. You know, so that's just the easy one to jump at. But there are a lot of things that you see repeated down through the generations. You talked about, you know, leaving leaving the kids with Uncle Leroy. I don't know which uncle you said, but in my book is Uncle Leroy. You know, and the half the problem is everybody knows what Uncle Leroy did, but we're too busy trying to cover it up. That now cousin Michael became the new Uncle Leroy for the next generation, and we allowed it to happen because we didn't openly address, like we talked about before. Some things didn't get openly addressed, and so the cycle of behavior kept kept moving forward. You know, and people thought it was all right, that it was going to keep on happening until we mess around and we lose cousin Michael because he the wrong niece, and you know what I'm saying, like so right there is where we have to say sorry as a culture. We have to say, the generations owe the next generations that apology for not addressing things that we allow to filter down into that next generation. But I'm gonna hold my mute right there.
Don't be scared, man. You can go. No, I'm with Gaddy. I was trying to write some stuff down. I'm like, womanizing, being disrespectful. I think we, me, I can't speak for everybody. Gaddy spoke for everybody. But cycle of behavior, unknowingly, knowingly, yeah. When I was out there disrespecting women, disrespecting my mother, disrespecting my father, disrespecting myself, my name, my community by doing damaging things to everybody around me. That's one of those cycles of behavior that I picked up from the elders. I picked up from my uncles. I picked that up, and I thought it was cool to do. Audibly hearing the word, but not allowing the word to permeate me and change me. We would go to church and do this, that, and the other. But once we left, same day, we were doing something crazy. Me. I think I grew up in a damaging area. So I think all those damaging things became norms. So if they were norms for the majority, they were popular. So you were popular doing these things, even though they were damaging to yourself and other people.
And I don't know. This was a tricky one because what made it kind of tricky was the unknowingly repeated. You know, some of the things that I thought I didn't know, it was just I knew at the end of the day. um, but I would say accountability, right? I'd look back at some of the cycles of behaviors. You know, I mentioned earlier some of the substance abuse from my father and stuff like that. And sometimes when you have people who go through and they're dealing with substance abuse, one of the big things is a lot of them do not have any accountability. And whether you believe it a disease or not, there are people who believe that and that it may contribute to that. But whether you do or you don't, I think some of that is the accountability piece. I think that's one of the behaviors. I think that sometimes when you grow up and you see your parents not having accountability for some of their behaviors and stuff like that, we as the children, we pick those things up as well, and then sometimes pass those things on, you know. And I think that sometimes some of the choices that we made in our life is because we were not accountable to certain things, you know, like Roland talked about this, and Gaddy talked about certain things. You know, we were not accountable to ourselves. We were not accountable, you know, to those our loved ones. You know, Roland talked about, you know, his mom and all these different people, you know. So I think that sometimes that cycle of behavior, that unaccountability that someone may see, is something that we unknowingly repeat, you know. And I guess, you know, if, you know, based off the question, I'm say sorry for is that, you know, some of the actions and some of the decisions that were made because of not being accountable to myself and who I was, or to someone may be, whatever those actions may be.
I apologize. AT&T is over here playing with my emotions.
Oh.
I'm gonna say complacency. I'm gonna start there.
Mm.
I think a lot of times we get complacent in our own little bubbles, and within the scope of that bubble, we elect to, I don't want to say to grind. We elect to just pull a pitch and stay right there. We're okay with it in our own little footprint. We got everything going on. But what we're failing to do is understand the legacy that's behind us, that's waiting to inherit what we develop. And because in most cases we did not plan for the legacy, and I'm talking generation to generation to generation. There are some that got it right. Don't get me wrong. Some, very few, not many. But because we didn't plan for the follow on generation to come, we didn't have anything to turn around and pass on to them. So, in essence, what we end up doing is telling them, say, hey, you got to go out there and get your own. You got to go out there and do your own thing. And so, complacency, whether we're talking relationship complacency, whether we're talking financial complacency, whether we're talking emotional complacency, like that's that's what actually happens. We have a great relationship with mama, but we don't necessarily have a good relationship with child. You know, the child do what I tell them to do when I tell them to do, and that's it. But we don't sit down and talk to the child and develop the child emotionally. We don't sit down and talk to the child to develop the child psychologically to the standpoint that they, at that point, can be springboarded off of your level of emotional intelligence. We don't talk to the child from a standpoint of financial literacy so that they can springboard from the level of my financial understanding moving into the world with being better financially prepared. So complacency is my answer. Understanding, even going back to, I know, Roland, you mentioned church. You know, we go to church and then we come back and go and do the same thing. even in the church, complacency. Because at the end of the day, I'm only teaching the same thing that somebody else taught me previously. I'm not doing the necessary level of digging to understanding and seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness. And therefore, what ends up happening is that I don't get to the point of teaching the younger generation how to understand the lines of scripture from the perspective of practical application. I don't I don't teach them from the old to the gospel to the new, so that they can understand the necessity of the Father, so that they can understand the identity of the Father, the necessity of the Son, and the need for the Holy Spirit moving forward. We don't do that from a perspective of leaving and teaching the generation. Flip it around. We do need to apologize for that. But I'm going to go back to the same thing that we teach our subordinates at work. We were taught all in the army. It's your career, and you got to take ownership of it. So, what I'm telling the younger generation, go get it. Go to your father, go to your mother, and ask them to teach you the things that you want to learn right now. Don't allow them to be complacent when it comes down to your development. Ask them the things, and parents, I'm putting it out there right now. I want your child to ask you the thing that makes you uncomfortable. I'm not talking to birds and the bees. I pray that your child asks you the questions to the point that you have to go do research. If my child is not challenging me intellectually, I'm not pouring enough into that child. My son asked me one day, he said, Dad, why am I taking science? I don't want to be a scientist. Because they said take science. That was my only answer, I promise. That's all I had. I had nothing else. I was literally dumbfounded that he asked me that question. I pray that every child asks their parent a question that makes them not give a surface level answer and think about the response that you're giving that child. And I pray that because they're asking questions at that level, you now have to go research so that you can sit down and have an intellectual conversation with that child. Complacency is my answer when it comes down to the cycle of behavior that we have unknowingly repeated, because we get way too comfortable in that. Any other thoughts? No? Okay. All right. That takes me to, man, this time is running. The double consciousness of age, code switching across generation. Now, we didn't talk about code switching on this channel before. You know, we get to the point, we get the swapping language, slang, jargon. We go silent when we're around some people. We become very stoic when we get around other people. And I think that's a thing that we got to be honest with ourselves about. So, gentlemen, I want to ask you, right after I thank Miss Deborah Lee. I greatly appreciate that. And again, you're welcome to come back anytime you want. In fact, make sure that you hit that notification button and hit that drop down and select notify all, so that you know every time we go live here. The question I want to ask you, gentlemen, why do we feel the need to code switch with each other? I really want to know.
Acceptance. Like, I know Roland from Michigan, from Detroit, and I want him to see me as a friend, or I want to be welcomed in. So when I see him, I'm gonna greet him like, "What up, though?" Make him feel at home when he hear me say, he'll be like, "Oh, word, you know about?" No, and I don't know nothing about Michigan. I just know what up, though, right? And so, but I want him to receive me with that welcoming spirit. So I switch up. It makes him comfortable and makes me feel more accepted. And I think we do that with one another. Like, we got there's people that we know from the military, and we greet them a certain way because we have that veteran background. Hey, what's going on, brother? How you doing, battle? You know, we say these things because we want to, hey, I'm a veteran like you, accept me. You know, same reason why we do it on the professional side. We get proper and we get articulate because I want to be accepted as a professional in this world. But at the same time, I want to be accepted as a bruh over here, you know, with my boys. So to me, that's the simple answer right there.
All right. So for me, I guess I'm probably look at it maybe a little bit different. So, and it may be based off of my definition of code switching. So when I'm thinking of code switching, I'm looking at it as nothing more than just changing my language based off the environment that I'm in. If maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I'm looking at it, and that's how I'm answering it. So I see it no different than if I'm going to China and I'm speaking Chinese. If I go to well, not that's a totally different language, but I don't necessarily always see it as a way to fit in. I see it as a way to sometimes build relationships and sometimes just to connect with somebody in similar language. You know what I mean? I definitely understand how some people do be like, yeah, they're just trying to fit in. You know what I mean? We all, I ain't gonna go there because based off of time, but I think it's, I think we feel the need to do it because it's a way in some cases to just be more effective with your communication, like, and I think sometimes it can be seen as a relationship builder. Like, I know a lady, I learned what up though a long time ago from a guy named Courtney, right? Way when I was back in Arizona, and he was from Michigan. He said, "What up though?" So when I met Roland, I said, "What?" When he told me he was from Michigan, I said, "What up though?" Because I associate what up though with somebody who is from Michigan. So it's a connecting point for me. There's a lady at work. She said she was from Michigan. And every time I see her down the hall, we be like, "What up, though?" I ain't from Michigan, but that's a connecting point to build a relationship with a colleague at work. So that's why I like, for me, code switching ain't a big deal based off of my definite code switching. So I just feel the need to code switch with each other. Just why is just because we just need to in order to have better or more effective communication.
I think both of y'all already talked about cultural connections and social acceptance. I think that sometimes we will do it to avoid stereotypes because we will use certain language around certain people so that they won't think simply because I'm a black man from the inner city that I have to use $2 words. I got to use these, lower level thinking, that I'm a lower level thinker. So sometimes we've studied and we've learned things and we've educated ourselves, and we want you to know because it allows the person as the sender to receive a message to let you know that, hey, I'm here. And it's like somebody said, it's a pride thing because I think when it comes to the cultural connection part, if somebody say what up though, I always smile. Or if I see I'm around here, you see people, they get that A on their hat and everybody roll tide, roll tide. Like roll tide mean everything because they are connected in that, if nothing else. They can say roll tide or hook 'em horns and all these other things that we say. But it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's just a connection thing. Sometimes it's an acceptance thing. And sometimes it's one of those things you just trying to be humorous. You say some things just to humor one another, bring light to a situation.
I like it. Just so you guys know, that A on the hat, that's not an Alabama A. That's the Atlanta Braves A. So those people wearing that A on their hat talking about roll tide, well, I'm gonna reserve my opinion based upon that. Anyway, to the question, I'm a curveball because that's what I do. Yeah, nobody care about that. Curveball because that's what I do. If I'm code switching, am I not giving a false representation for you to relate to? Because I'm not being who I really am. I'm being who I think you want me to be in that particular point in time. If I'm code switching here, is it possible that I'm also code switching over there? Especially when we get around our family members. Do we code switch around our family members? I'm just, just throwing out some things to think about, rhetorical, right? So everybody can kind of think about it. If I feel the need to code switch, then what does that really say about me? Like I think I think the first time I really got it was brought to my awareness is hearing my ex-wife talk to me and then get on the phone and talk to one of her coworkers or whatever. I'm like, who in the world is wait a minute. Like, I don't even know who that woman is on the phone right there. Like, you sound like a whole different person. I'm trying to figure this out. I got some questions. Me personally, I'm not a fan of code switching. And it's because of the fact that at the end of the day, if I am code switching around you, I'm not even showing you who I really am. I'm only showing you who I think you want to see, or who I'm kind of in line with Gaddy, like acceptance, but I'm also understanding, to relate. But even there, my concern is, if I do it to relate, is it because I'm not comfortable with who I am? Like, I'm stuck in between those different understandings of code switching, simply because at the end of the day, if I know who I am, I'm comfortable in who I am, going back to the teaching that parents are supposed to do with their kids and the upbringing, and I know who I'm called to be, do I really need to code switch, or do I have the character to support the person that I'm presenting to you up front? I got the what up, though. I got that part. That's kind of humorous, whatever. I'm not necessarily talking about that specifically. I'm talking about when you're a different person at work than you are at home. I'm talking about you're a different person at that, at the company cookout than you are when you get to the house around your family and things of that nature. Because at the end of the day, if your family see you as this person at work, don't they question who you are when you come home? Right? Like, you are totally different over there. You real nice over there, but you come over here and you got, horns sticking out your head and all kind of stuff of that, things of that nature. So that's just my thoughts, rhetorical in question, but it's something that we all can consider. Because at the end of the day, the code switching, like, do they really know who they get? And then what happens when they meet the real version of me? Do they become disappointed? Do they, do I get excommunicated, voted off the island? Am I no longer accepted? Is that one of the fears that I have? Therefore, I code switch. So it's just my thoughts. Go ahead, on.
All right. So I think that I can be the same person and just display different behaviors based off of my environment. I can be the same unk, but if I'm in church, I may be this way. I can be the same unk, but if I'm at a football game with my son, my behaviors are different. I'm still the same. I'm still the same person, but my behaviors and my language may change a little bit based off of my environment. In church, I may say hallelujah and thank you, Jesus, and use these certain words that we use in church. When I'm at the football game, I may be yelling and screaming and rah-rah and hoo-hooing. You know what I mean? I'm code switching. I'm using different behaviors based off of my environment. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to please anybody. So if I'm looking at code switching, I'm just looking, that's what I'm looking at code switching as. So if maybe I have a different definition of what code switching is, but for me, what I'm getting from it is just using different language.
And I don't think that your definition is different. I just think the way that you view it uh, is slightly different. And what I mean by that is, like, that is, to me, the definition is the same. What you just said, but I don't look at who I am when I'm cheering for a team. Is not me code switching. That's just, if I ain't cheering for the team, I ain't cheering. All right. I'm not screaming and yelling walking down the street because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not watching the Knicks play. You know what I mean? Like, but when I see the Knicks play, I get a little more animated and excited. But that's, to me, I don't look at that as code switching. Situations are different. It's just like if I get scared and I jump, I ain't code switching because I ain't jump everywhere I go. I got scared. But when it comes to the point of, like, because now when you brought up church, I think that's kind of the problem that the religious viewpoint of the scriptures bring about, is that there's a place that is so holy that I have to act different when I get there. But should I not be that person all the time? Now, but that's when we take away religion and we make it cultural. That this is my way of living. This is not just my quote unquote belief system. This is what I am a believer. I don't just believe, but I am a believer of this thing. So I look at, so I do agree there, but then that means that the problem is is either the structure, or the problem is the fact that we have made this structure a thing that I have to be different in order to be there. And then when we talk about professional, and I'm glad, Coach, you went there, and I was holding my mute this whole like when you brought that up. But this is why it's nothing wrong. Like, everybody hates when we talk about building stuff of our own in our community. It's not that, not that, you know, we don't want nobody else. Nobody else should be able to build. Nobody else should be able to support. But in the way that you're talking about it, well, then maybe it is a problem if we are not saying, if we're saying that we can't authentically be ourselves in order to be professional. And the truth of the matter is, if I want a job at your establishment, I have to come into the culture you set up in order for me to get a check of your money into my account. Well, if we build something that was built around our culture and how we behave, or just around our culture, right? If we build a culture, it's layers to it, right? You know, I wanted to make it sound so, you know, ground level, but there's layers to it. We build a culture, we build stuff of our own, then maybe we don't have to code switch to go to work.
I'll jump in and be quick because I know the time is at the essence. Because I like what you said, Gaddy, but then I'm like, because if we build a culture, I think with us, we consider a lot of things that are deemed as, most people looking at it will see it as ignorant, as our culture. Because you do this, you swing this way, you know, and what you were saying before is similar to how on Friday, when the old ladies came knocking at the door and asked, was they ready for Jehovah's return? And then when Ice Cube said what he said, next thing were some curse words coming out their mouth. So the first person wasn't you. Now you showing the real you. And I think that's what Coach was going. When you got to be somebody else to appease other people, then that's definitely a con in my book, because I don't know, I like to be comfortable, and it's exhausting being somebody else, exhausting trying to talk like somebody else and trying to walk like somebody else, when you can easily just walk in as yourself. And if they accept you, they accept you. If they don't, good riddance.
Yeah. And again, that's why I said it's rhetorical, because we can go back and forth about this for the next 30, 45 minutes and still never come to an understanding. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the way I behave, in most cases, I behave based upon the information that I get from my environment. If that part we understand to be true, then a lot of times you don't really have a choice but to code switch. But as we continue to grow and develop and learn and become more mature, it should be very minimal change across every environment that I go in. Therefore, I understand that even though the environment may request a thing of me, I was already that thing before I came into that environment. That's the point that I'm getting at. And so the more of a variance between who I am here and who I am over here, that helps me to understand that I am still trying to figure out exactly my true identity. But as those bubbles start equaling out, that is evidence that I'm having a better understanding of who I am, and I am responding in time and space based upon the information that I'm receiving in such a way that I honor the identity that I currently have. And that's my point. So as always, you know, I appreciate you guys staying with us, because we went a little over tonight. And what I want to do is kind of transition at this point into our final thoughts. So I know it's coming as a surprise because I didn't put it out. But what I want to do is just kind of start with Gad and just swing it around and come back up. And the idea is that we're going to take the last question. The last section is legacy as a collaborative art, building an intergenerational R&D lab, research and development lab. Okay. And what I want you guys to kind of end off with, and you can add to as you talk about, what problem in our community could we solve if we paired with someone 30 years younger or older than us? So again, what problem in our community could we solve if we paired with someone 30 years older or younger than us. So, that being said, young Timothy, sir, you have the floor.
Mm, I like this. I believe the problem that we could solve really is direction. Why do I say direction? Because if I pair with someone 30 years older than me, they can kind of walk walk me through how we got to where we are at the time I got here, right? And then 30 years younger, they tell you what it looks like for them now. And so there we are there we are where we can now begin to bridge that gap and we can understand the journey, right? Some things that worked 30 years ago doesn't work for my generation, and what worked for me doesn't work for someone younger than me, because we're in different spaces in time, because this person is living as a a 70-year-old man. I'm living as a 39-year-old man, and then I guess the next would be 9-year old, but still we bridge that. We can see the direction we're going, and now we understand. uh and I love when you talk about the research and development in the lab building this legacy, because the reality is, when I said build culture, getting back to the who we are supposed to be, who we were designed to be, and be that, and let's grow into that, and understanding our story, understanding our history, understanding where we are now, and understanding where we're going. I think the next generation will have a blueprint laid out for them to continue the journey going forward, and just never stop in this cycle of building, respecting our elders and understanding our youth, and respecting our times that we're in now. That's how I look at that journey.
Man, deep question. I think we could target and solve illiteracy within our community, because we have children that can't read over a fifth grade level. We can also hit financial literacy, when someone that has made it out and has the structure to help someone find out how to manage their money, to make their money, and where to put their money so that it can cause a positive effect in where they're going. Also, fatherless homes. I think that's one of those things that detrimental to our community, having fatherless homes where you don't have the male leadership, male headship, and guidance, and also male leadership. If we had more male leadership, and not saying that the women have to take a back row, but that the men actually stand up and do their part, we will have less crime, less everything else that happens detrimental to our communities.
I'm gonna keep mine with something that not saying that anything anyone said is not achievable, but I'm gonna go with something physical. I'm gonna go with type 2 diabetes, right? So it can't be cured, but it can something that can be managed with just getting your blood sugars levels under a certain number. So I think that if if our generation right now would be able to have a good conversation, um paired with someone 30 years younger, I think that's a problem that can be solved. I think that there are a lot of problems in our community that come from obesity and different things like that. And I think some of it comes from lack of knowledge and lack of information, just like Roland talked about the financial literacy. I think the same thing goes into like the wellness literacy in our community as well. I think that everybody didn't grow up learning about it. So it's something that is not necessarily pumped into the community. So I think that not everybody really understands it and really understand the significance of living a certain type of lifestyle and how that lifestyle affects you throughout your life and later on in your years. So I would just say something like, a disease or something like like a type 2 diabetes or something like that. And I'm no health expert. So if I'm off a little bit on terms, then please forgive me.
I greatly appreciate hearing everybody's point and all great points. I'm just going to keep it simple. I think we can solve the family problem. I think one of the things that we're seeing in massive numbers right now is that the family, the nucleus, the husband, wife, and children being in the same home is just an option in today's society. So I think one of the things that we could do if 51-year-old me was paired with a 21-year-old me, we could solve the family problem. We can have conversations. And again, like we talked about previously, being transparent, being honest, sharing from the well of lessons learned, some by mistake, some by trial and error, some by just learning. Um, Having that conversation to where we can kind of increase the population of whole families living under the same roof and living a life that is honorable moving forward. So that's kind of like where I'm gonna go with that. And for the sake of time, that's kind of like where I'm gonna leave it. So listen, greatly appreciate everybody's perspective. Greatly appreciate everybody who stuck with us. We know we went a little bit over time, but we hope that this conversation served you well. Tomorrow morning, remember, Sister Nodella has her part two of the Healed Mind Conference, and this one's called the Implementation. So if you were at the Healed Mind Conference, by all means, like she said, you are invited to the implementation. Sunday morning, TikTok Live, 11:30. I think it is. I don't. This
Voice.
Reason, the Voice of Reason. Yes, I'm sorry. The Voice of Reason will be hosting. So again, make sure that you join us then. 2 o'clock Bible study, and the full gamut for the rest of the week. So that being said, listen, we appreciate you guys. We value you guys. Again, let the best version of yourself be a blessing to somebody else, and have a great rest of your evening.